So this is going to be the easiest way to understand when you're referencing the J or the P in their typing code system. What they're talking about is that the J and the P are talking. And once you understand these four things, you'll understand the J and the P much more clearly. So number one is going to be what the J and the P are not. Number two is going to be what everyone misses about the J and the P that causes such confusion. Number three is going to be what the J and the P actually are and what they're referring to. And number four is going to be why we say one is more organized and one is more chaotic. Once you understand these four things, you're going to have a much better understanding of what the J and the P are referring to. So let's start with number one. What the J and the P are not. They are not cognitive functions. That's really important to understand because I see a lot of people who come in discussions and forums and say, I think I'm an INF, but I'm not sure if I'm a P or a J. And the thing is that P and the J makes completely different type, completely different cognitive function stack. So they are not cognitive functions. And if somebody's trying to decide between the P and the J, they are in the number one issue of my video on the top 5 reasons on why you can't find your personality type. So you can check that one out, but you're falling into the problem of perspective and missing the detail. So check that one out, but they are not cognitive functions. You should not be trying to determine your type by the P and the J. Number two is what everyone misses about the J and the P. And that is that these are specific to the MBTI, to the Myers-Briggs type indicator. It is their coding system for the type code that they came up with. And so a lot of other systems use it, right? You have Socionics, which uses the 16 personality types. You have Objective Personality, which even though they have 512 types, they're still kind of in that confine of using the 16 personality type coding system because it is so widely known, so widely accepted, and it was never trademarked by Myers-Briggs, which allows everybody to use that as a universal language to discuss the types. But they are not the same. Socionics will use it and they'll change out the cognitive functions and say, let us talk about the INFJ, which is actually the INFP, because they use a perceiving function, and that is changing the coding system of MBTI. That is not MBTI's coding system, but they're kind of stuck within it and having to use that because it is what everybody knows so well. And it's really important to understand that there's kind of a history of where this came from, and that is from the book Gifts Differing. It talks about this really quickly, and it explains, and I'll read you the passage. So this comes from Gifts Differing, and I know this is going to be backwards on your monitor. Sorry, I have myself switched so I can, whenever I raise my right hand, I can see it on the right side for me. It just makes it easier for my brain to kind of see what I'm doing. But I want to read you a passage to explain where this comes from. It says the inclusion of the J and the P preference in the theory came about as a result of unpublished personality research by Catherine C. Briggs before Jung's Personality Types was published. When Jung's theory was published in 1923, she saw that it went far beyond her own and made an intensive study of it. She interpreted them to mean that the auxiliary process runs the introvert's outer world. This is really important to understand what we're talking about here in the J and the P. She looked at the outer lives of her meditative friends, that was kind of how she termed certain types, to see if that was true and concluded that it was. Briggs also found that when the introvert's auxiliary was a perceptive process, it gave rise to the perceptive attitude and an outer personality that resembled in a quiet way the spontaneous personality of the perceptive extrovert. When the auxiliary was a judging process, it produced a judging attitude and an outer personality that was the opposite of spontaneous. So this is going to be the easiest way to understand when you're referencing the J or the P in their typing code system. What they're talking about is that the J and the P are talking about the first extroverted function within that person's function stack. So if we're talking about the ESTP, the first extroverted function is going to be SE, extroverted sensing. And that's what makes them a perceiving type, is that their first extroverted function is a perceiving function, extroverted sensing. So let's talk about it when we say the INFJ. What is their first extroverted function, right? Their first function is introverted intuition, and that's an introverted function. So what's their first extroverted function? And that is FE, extroverted feeling. That is what makes them a J. Their first way of dealing with their outside world is in a feeling judgmental way, an extroverted feeling way. So that's what makes them a J instead of a P. And like I said, I know Socionics wants to change that and go, they're not a J. They are a J in the Myers-Briggs type coding system, because it's referring to their extroverted world, the way that they deal with their extroverted world, and that is in a judging function. So don't confuse that. Don't let other systems want to talk about it and change it. That's fine. They can change it for how they think it should be viewed. But that is the J and the P within MBTI is talking about the first extroverted function. So I want to do a 3-point A here, because this is really important to have this addendum when we're talking about that extroverted function. What does that mean? And the way that Gifts Differing puts it, and I think this is a great analogy, is that the first function is the general. That's who's in charge, that's who is leading. And so for the extroverted type, so we'll go back to that ESTP, the ESTP, when you are seeing SE, that is who's in charge, that is who is leading, is that SE. That is who you get to deal with and who you interact with. So you get to see the general right up front. Now for the introvert, let's go back to the INFJ. You don't get to talk to the general. This is for all introverts. You don't get to talk to the general. You don't get to talk to who's in charge. They're in the back, they're in the tent, and they're busy making their plans, going over their processes. They don't have time to kind of interrupt that right now. So who you get to talk to is their first extroverted function, and that's the aide. That's the person you're going to come in and kind of see. They'll handle it. They'll make sure everything's being handled in their outside world, while the general gets to work on their plans in the back. So you get to talk to the aide who's going to handle everything in the outside world for them. So that's really important to understand. The J and the P are referring to the first extroverted function, and that's who most people get to deal with. Whether it is an extrovert, you get to deal with the general right up front, or the introvert, and you get to deal with the aide, which is the first extroverted function. And of course, there's number 4. Why do we say that the J tends to be more organized and the P, we say, tends to be a little bit more chaotic? What is that referring to? Why would that be? Now, when we look again, we keep that idea of the system that we're talking about, the first extroverted function. So for the P types, we say the ESTP, the first extroverted function is SE. That's a perceiving type. So their outside world deals with perceiving information and using that. And again, they can be a little more chaotic with that. They're okay because they want to dwell in new information. So they're okay with new information coming in. They're not trying to create that tunnel vision that I talk about in my other video on how to verify your type. They're okay with not creating this tunnel vision and keeping everything inside. They want to explore. They want to see new things. So compared to other types, that feels much more chaotic. They're open to that, to seeing what's new. Whereas for the J types, let's talk about, say, the TE, the ENTJ, ESTJ. They are going to be organizing. Now, what are they organizing? They are organizing people. They have to make sure that there is a TE system, that everybody is working properly within their areas, and that it's all making sense. We all have to have our function within that, and they feel responsible. They can't help but see that information. And so whenever somebody's not doing something, or this doesn't make any sense, or this is getting in the way, then that that feels chaotic to them, and they have the need to organize people in their outside world. And it is the same with the FE types. So let's go to 2 introverts. Talk about the INFP. So their first extroverted function is NE. It's a perceiving function. And again, they are more open to having things be a little bit more chaotic. They're okay. They kind of want to talk about, those different ideas and where things could go. And yes, they will have that tunnel vision of their own internal feelings at the top, but they're not worried about their outside world having to fit within this rigid system. In fact, it ends up being their inferior, and they're like, hey, I don't want to be put into this rigid system. I want to be open to kind of seeing where things could go, and I'm going to deal with my outside world. I'm okay with it being a little more chaotic. I'm not trying to organize people. I'm not trying to make sure everything is fitting in this system. Whereas the INFJ, their first extroverted function is FE. And FE is back to organizing people. Like to make sure that everybody is kind of doing okay. We're all falling into a way where we are working together. And I know whenever we talk about organization, it can feel like we're talking about something more specific. Like, I like piles of paper specifically in this order. Like, that's not exactly what we're talking about. What we're talking about is that they want things to be organized. They want people to be organized in how we do things. And so yes, they're going to structure themselves in a certain way to make sure, and like, hey, there's no misunderstanding here. I want to make sure it all makes sense and that everybody is being communicated with, to make sure that we're all fitting within this FE system, because we need everybody to be kind of keeping things together so that we can all work together. And so they're organizing people in their outside world, which, you may not see the NI. You may not see that it can be a little chaotic in there. And so you may not see the NI and see how far-fetched that is and how wild their ideas are and how far-flung that is, and what they think about kind of on this, and what they think about, when their mind is just going in that blank inner world state. But on the outside, they're wanting to make sure that everything is functioning properly, that people are functioning properly. And so whenever they give instructions or they do things, it probably is going to feel very organized. We need this person to do this person to do this person over here is looking kind of sad. I'm going to go talk to them, make sure I bring them back into the fold so that they can be part of this group and we can all keep going together and all keep building together. And FE and TE are doing the same thing. They're organizing people. And that's why that J is related to that kind of organizing, and that P, whether it's the first function or the auxiliary, that second function, it is still a perceiving and is open to being a little more chaotic, right? Let's deal in the world of ideas. We don't have to necessarily structure everybody. Like, let's just kind of keep it open. Let's see where it goes. Let's see what happens. And that is not what the TE and FE dominant and auxiliary functions want to do. They're like, no, we need to keep this organized. We need to keep things going. And so that's why you have the organization, the organized type, versus the perceiving, more chaotic type. And that's what that's referring to. So hopefully that clears up any misunderstandings about the J and the P. All makes sense. And now that you're understanding the cognitive functions more and this coding system, now you can head over to my top 5 reasons that you can't find your type. Look into those, and after that, make sure that you check out how to verify your type. Thanks for watching.